Greetings everyone, I hope you're all well. I'm Jarda Bach, and tonight I will be with you for a special interview with a distinguished guest to discuss important topics, especially those that affect every family and individual in the Kurdistan region. As you know, we are currently in the midst of a 16-day campaign organized by the Kurdistan regional government along with several organizations. This campaign focuses on the elimination of violence against women, families and children. These are issues we encounter on a daily basis, and one ongoing phenomena is violence against women. The statistics show that there has not been a significant change between last year and this year. We still need to organize more awareness campaigns. The organizations, government, and international institutes must put in more efforts to address this issue so that in the future, the Kurdistan region will not only eliminate violence against women, but will also reach a point where this issue is no longer even a topic of discussion. One of the individuals who has been deeply involved in this process for many years is someone who continuously works to create awareness campaigns, informing everyone that killing women is a despicable act. Violence against women is a vile act that goes against all religious, social, and family principles. Currently, I am in the capital of the Kurdistan region with Mrs. Sherri Kraham Talabany, president and founder of the SEED Foundation. We will discuss all of these important topics. Thank you, Mrs. Sherri. Let's begin with the 16-day campaign for the elimination of violence against women. What is the importance of this campaign each year?
Well, the 16 days of activism against violence against women is the kickoff of a 16-day global campaign. And it's a reminder to all of us that we need to work and act together to end violence against women. So it's intended to raise awareness, to demand accountability, and to find ways that we can listen to survivors and raise their voices. It's also a reminder that violence against women is a problem in Kurdistan and Iraq, but it is a problem everywhere. So we are connected to the rest of the world, and it's a chance to mobilize our attention to how we can decrease violence. It's also really important that we remember that violence against women will continue for 365 days a year. And so after the campaign ends, we also need to continue to work towards greater accountability, societal action, so families acting together to protect their loved ones, and decreasing the norm that violence is acceptable. So we need to have a zero tolerance policy. So the 16 days is just a way for all of us to come together and remind us that we have an issue that we can solve and work on together.
As the SEED Foundation, what are your activities during this 16 days, and what do you do?
During the 16 days, our organization is working with other organizations, partners in government, to do community awareness. So going into communities, working with families, working with women, working with men, families together, children, going into schools and universities, and drawing attention to the fact that violence is not normal, and we should all protest violence, and we should all work together to end violence, and telling people if they are facing violence, how to get help.
You work with the SEED Foundation and live in the Kurdistan region, where you are closely connected to the people. How do you view the situation of women and their freedoms in the region?
Well, I find that there's many remarkable women working and living here in Kurdistan and pushing for equality and their rights. But we also have the highest rate of domestic violence in the world here in Iraq, all across Iraq, including Kurdistan. So 45% of women face sexual or physical violence in their home. So it is the highest rate in the world. So we do have a problem, and we do need to address it. We have a really strong government institution, a law enforcement institution. We have shelters. We have a great law criminalize domestic violence. So we have some really good foundations, but it really, we need to focus on collective action and enforcement of the laws, accountability for perpetrators, and we also need to come together as families and a society to say violence must end.
When you hear that a woman or a girl is being abused in the Kurdistan region, what does the SEED Foundation do, and how do you handle such cases?
So women and girls that face violence need a support network around them. So we try to identify where their support is. We assess their needs, and so if they have needs for emergency protection, they can access protective services of the government. So we work with them to inform them of their rights, and their decision about what they want to do is really up to them. And women take a variety of decisions. Sometimes they do pursue criminal charges, sometimes they do ask for family help, and our desire is to inform them of what their choices are and what their rights are, and support them in their decisions.
The theme for this year's campaign to eliminate violence against women is every 10 minutes a woman is killed. How alarming is it that every 10 minutes a woman is killed? At the same time, what is the rate of violence and killings of women in the Kurdistan region?
Yeah, so this year's theme is about femicide, which is the murder of women and girls, and it's a rising problem all over the world, and it's a rising problem here. Femicide should not be looked at as an isolated act, because femicide is really, most of the time it's not an isolated act. It's a progression of domestic violence. So usually we see if domestic violence goes unchecked, that it escalates. So it might start off with psychological or emotional violence, and then it might escalate to physical or sexual violence. And then if left unchecked, it could rise to a fatal level of murder. So we do have this as a problem here. We've seen more prosecutions and convictions of murderers over the last 10 years. So I think there have been improvements in accountability for perpetrators, but we won't really see an end or a decrease to femicide unless we focus on ending domestic violence, because as I said, femicide is the most extreme version of domestic violence, but it is a continuum. So if we want to end femicide, we need to intervene earlier. We need to say domestic violence is not okay. So violence in the home is not okay. And when we see accountability for those perpetrators, we will see the decrease or the end of femicide.
How do you perceive the situation in Kurdistan? How conducive is the environment for women's freedom, and how healthy is it?
Well, I think there are many parts of the Kurdistan, of Kurdish culture and the culture here, that are very supportive to women. And historically, we've seen a very strong role for women. Women as Peshmerga or supporting Peshmerga, women as activists in the dark days of Saddam. But we've also seen in Kurdistan's history that women are targeted because they're women. So during the Anfal campaign, for example, who else was targeted besides men? Women were also targeted with violence. We've seen the ISIS crisis. Women were being targeted with violence. So we have a long history of conflict here, and that impacts the culture, and that impacts all of society. And unfortunately, what we've seen is that violence has become a normal, acceptable thing. So when we have such high rates of domestic violence, it means that society is not protesting that enough. So while we see that historically women have had a really prominent role in Kurdistan, and we see women here in business and in government and playing a prominent role as the head of the family raising children, and all of these roles are really important. But we have to focus on that part of the culture that has said violence against women is okay, or if you are faced with violence, if a woman is faced with violence, that she should remain silent and accept it. No, we should, as family members, think that the abuser is the one that should have shame. The abuser should be the one that should be silenced, and the abuser is the one that should be pushed out of the family, not the victim of the violence. So I think there's a strong role for families to play here in pushing down that violence.
ڕۆڵی خێزان چ لەوەی کە
What role do families play in preventing violence, and how can a family raise a healthy male individual who does not consider committing violence against women?
Well, I think that's exactly the right question to ask, because we each have a role. Every single person in Kurdistan has a role to play if we don't want the cycle of violence to continue. Because we know that when a child grows up in a household that is violent, so many terrible things happen to them as a result. So being exposed to violence from a father against a mother, or an uncle against a sister, when children are exposed to violence, they have huge emotional harms, psychological harms. They face depression, anxiety, and trauma. They don't do well in school, okay? And we know that children that are exposed to these norms, they accept it as normal because this is what they grew up with. So if they're boys that are exposed to violence growing up think it's normal to perpetrate violence, and they become perpetrators of violence. Girls that see violence in their home, they expect violence, and they see that as normal too, and they become victims of violence. So if we want a healthy, thriving family and a healthy, thriving society, we have to start the cycle. We have to stop the cycle of violence. So intervening to support these survivors and to ensure that families are harmonious and they solve their problems in different ways. Everybody gets angry and everybody has struggles here. People have real serious challenges, financial challenges and other challenges in their lives. But we have to find other nonviolent ways to resolve those conflicts at home.
ئەمە خێزان بەڵام ڕۆڵی حکوومەتی
While families play an important role, the government's role is also crucial in preventing such situations and fostering a healthy community. For what you've observed, has the Kurdistan regional government taken adequate steps to address these issues?
تا ئێستا شتێکی وای کردو بۆ بەرەنگاربوون ئەم بابەتە.
The government in Kurdistan has made huge strides, and I think in many ways they're ahead of the rest of Iraq and other countries in the region. So we have institution, Department of Combating Violence Against Women and Children, that was established in 2009-10. We have the shelter system that was created around the same time to provide women a safe haven against violence. And we have a very powerful and progressive domestic violence law. So all of these institutions and the legislative framework that exist, all is fantastic. And we have many champions in government that we partner with, and we work to build capacity and understanding. So we see that there's a robust response. Where I think maybe we can fall down a little bit is seeing the enforcement of the laws and really seeing prosecutions and convictions. So a lot of times women are afraid to come forward and get help because they don't feel confident that the justice system will hold the perpetrator responsible for the violations of the law. So we really have to act on enforcement, and we are working with the judiciary to increase knowledge about how domestic violence happens and what the law provides for and all of the services that the government does provide, and connecting people to get help. And I think a big part of it is shifting the societal views that the woman that receives the violence is not to blame. She's never to blame. It's always the abuser that is to blame.
Okay, let's talk about organizations. While families play an important role and the government serves as an observer, organizations also have a significant role, especially an organization like the SEED Foundation. What can these organizations do to promote gender balance in the Kurdistan region and reduce the rate of violence against women?
ئافرەتان و ژنان.
NGOs also have a really powerful role to play. Our organization, SEED, is focusing on creating a world where everybody can thrive, women, men, and children, everybody, all of us, hamuman. And we do that in a variety of ways. We do that at the individual level, helping survivors be safe and get the services and support that they need. At the family level, helping them solve problems and come together and support each other as a family, and at the community level. And we also work on these issues. Besides providing services to individuals and families, we also work with government to strengthen capacity, to ensure that the first responders, one, that they care for themselves because they face these violent circumstances every day and they have very high rates of stress and they're internalizing all of this. So working to support the frontline responders in government and other NGOs to respond to protect people as their jobs, to do their jobs, and making sure we have systems in place that respond. And we also work with families and communities to shift the beliefs and norms about violence and about how a family can operate, and ensuring that people understand that when you raise women up and empower them, it's not intended to break down the family. No, it's intended to strengthen the family unit and make people operate more harmonious, happier, and to be more supportive of each other. So NGOs have a huge role to play in supporting families and individuals with services, in helping support and strengthen the mechanisms of response, in raising awareness so everybody understands where to get help, and that if we want a healthy and happy society, we need to come together and support each other.
What is your response to the claim that sometimes organizations, especially NGOs, have a negative role in conducting awareness campaigns for women and girls in society? Some even blame the organizations for increasing the rate of violence rather than helping to eliminate it.
Yeah, so when NGOs raise awareness about the problems, they have become themselves the targets of negative attention and scrutiny and backlash, including threats of our safety. So organizations like SEED have been targeted because people have this myth, this belief that what we're trying to do is to break up the family or challenge traditions and belief systems. The reality is that I think all of us can agree that violence is a negative thing for our society. Violence impacts everybody. Violence keeps a society down. It keeps society from progressing. When women can't participate fully in society, the economy doesn't grow. When women don't have access to health care, they can't raise healthy children. And so when we lift up women, all of the family is better off and all of society is better off. And so I think we need to think about shifting the blame. NGOs aren't driving divorces up. Violence is driving divorces up. And so it may seem that having this discussion come to light, right, having it out in the open is harmful to society, but it's actually just talking about a real problem that exists and needs to come to light in order for us to come together and to solve those problems.
Regarding the activities carried out by organizations for women's and family awareness, especially on how society should treat women and girls, do you think they are following the right path? Do their methods align with our community's needs?
All organizations, operate in different ways with different approaches. I can only speak for our approach, which is we believe that men are our allies and our partners in this process. Men have their role in society, women have their role in society, and we need to come together. So we don't want to make, in our organization, we don't think of men as villains, and we think that we're all partners. And we need to think together about how we solve the problems that we have here in Kurdistan. And so we do take a pretty technical approach to our work. We want to do things in a way that's effective, that doesn't alienate or push away anybody. We want to bring everybody in, and we think it's important to engage religious leaders and people at universities and rural people that are out in the farm, and to engage a whole bunch of actors together to work to solve these problems. And everybody is a part of the solution. So I think that sometimes we have to take care about the way we raise issues so that we aren't alienating people, and we're trying to get people to find common ground. And I think the common ground is kind of SEED's theme, which is we want a future where everyone can thrive. And that, I think, is common ground for all of us. We want to see society better off. We want to see Kurdistan prosperous and independent and thriving financially and socially. So this is common ground, and I think all organizations working on these issues do seek to try to find common ground, and people just go about their work in different ways.
What are the factors in the Kurdistan region that prevent the elimination of violence against women? Why do we still hear about women being killed or facing violence at home or in their workplaces? What are the factors that make it difficult to control this issue?
Well, I think part of the reason that violence has become normalized is that we've had so much war and conflict. So you can go back to Saddam's time and him plotting all of these different components of society against each other. We can go back to the Iran-Iraq war. We can go to the persecution of the Kurds and the chemical weapons and the Anfal campaign and all of that. And we had about 10 years of stability after the change in Baghdad, and we saw stability and progress and things moving ahead in Kurdistan, and then we saw ISIS again using women as a tool of war. So I think all of this conflict has normalized violence as a way to solve problems. So I think the roots of the problems are about equality, and that every citizen, women and men and Kurds and every other component of society, Christians and Yazidis and Shia and Sunni, all of the components of society should have an equal place and should have their rights respected. And so it really is inequality that drives this violence. And I think that when we look at societies all around the world, Iraq is ranked as one of the worst places in the world for women when it comes to women's rights and women's protection and women's safety. And if you look at countries that are at the bottom of the list with Iraq, it's countries that are all failed and fragile states. So all countries at war. And if you look at the countries at the top of the list where women's rights and women's safety is protected, those are all very wealthy and thriving countries. And there's no reason why Iraq can't be a stable, thriving, rich country where the society is developed and all people earn their rights and receive their rights. So I think we need to look at what society do we want here in Kurdistan, and do we want to be up there with these free democracies where their economy is growing and everybody has a right to participate, or do we want to be down with the failed and fragile states? And right now we're down there, and there's no secret that the safety and protection of women and women's rights is directly linked to the stability and the safety of the country. And if we don't want war and we don't want conflict, we need to move towards better protection of everybody's rights.
One of the most common violations against girls is child marriage. Many young girls under the age of 18 are forced into marriage. What is your perspective on this?
So after domestic violence, early marriage, femicide, and early marriage are the next problems. Early and forced marriage is a huge problem across Iraq. And we see efforts even now to push the regulation of personal status issues out of the courts where people's rights can be protected and and this is really harmful for women and girls. So early marriage deprives girls the right to an education, the right to her health, because when you have early marriage, children are having children. And so it has so many disastrous consequences, not just for that young girl who's being deprived of her healthy childhood, but her family has lower health outcomes and lower education outcomes. So her children are impacted. And again, perpetuating this cycle of violence. So early and forced marriage is an incredibly important issue to tackle. I think we've really made huge strides here in Kurdistan. It is a place in some areas. It is a problem. It is a continued problem, but progress has been made, and we need to continue to combat that, because all girls need to grow up and become adults and finish their basic education before they could become good family members, good mothers, and raise their family to be healthy and happy.
How do you view the role of law in this matter? Do you feel that the laws in both the Kurdistan region and Iraq adequately support women's rights, or do some of the current problems arise because of these laws?
So here in Kurdistan, we have a pretty robust legal framework for the protection of women. Some challenges remain with implementation, but we're far better off than in the rest of Iraq, where they don't have a domestic violence law at all. In fact, Kurdistan is one of the leaders in the entire Middle East region, because we're one of the few countries that does have a domestic violence law. So that's the first part. In terms of its implementation, I think the government has put in robust mechanisms, like the Department of Combating Violence Against Women. The shelter provides physical protection. I think where we're lacking sometimes is the enforcement. We need to see, as a deterrent, we need to see convictions of people that perpetrate violence, any sort of violence. So the law is there. It could always be improved, and there have been several attempts over the law was passed in 2011, and there have been several attempts in recent years to make the law more robust, and there's a lot of technical small things that the government has found challenging in implementation, some limitations there. But I think that it is a strong law, and we have the penal code, which prevents sexual assault and rape, murder, and we have a whole body of laws. So the legal framework can always be strengthened, but it's a great starting point. And what we need to see is strong resources going to these institutions. As you probably know, we haven't had a budget here in Kurdistan. We don't get our money from Baghdad, and so getting the money from Baghdad, doing all we can to negotiate our budget for Kurdistan, and then properly resourcing these important institutions. The shelter should have a monthly budget that they know what they're going to get. The police forces should be resourced properly. And once that happens, then we can really focus on building capacity and strengthening enforcement in the court system.
You mentioned shelters. I would like to ask about the situation of these shelters, places that became home for women and girls who face threats to their life. Are you aware of their current conditions?
I'm very familiar with the government domestic violence shelter system, and they do a good job of providing physical protection, right? For women that can get access to the shelter system. I think they are, as I mentioned, very under-resourced, understaffed, and I think there are a lot of champions working there that are trying to do all they can to protect women. What we need to focus on is, and there's a lot of women in this shelter that actually don't face high rates of violence, but they just have nowhere to go. They might have mental health issues, or they may be divorced and their family doesn't support them. So there's a lot of women in the shelter system that probably there's a better alternative for them. Alternative housing and other family supports that would be a better support than living in the government shelter. The government shelter really should be focused on only those women that have very serious protection requirements. And then we need to find long-term changes in society that allow women to live safely outside the shelter. So many women are in the shelter because of honor-based violence risks, and those risks don't go down over time. So we have women sometimes that have been in the shelter for 7 years, 10 years. So we have some very big challenges that we face, and most of them focus on the family support and the family system, and the families shifting their focus away from harming the woman to supporting the woman.
مادام شلتر هەیە هێشتا
Since shelters are still in operation and people are living in them, it seems that we have not yet created a calm and healthy environment for women in the Kurdistan region. Additionally, Kurdistan remains open to international cooperations, with many countries having representatives and institutes here. How can these international entities help improve the situation for women?
First, we have to make sure that everything that we do here in Kurdistan, when we bring in international donors, best practices from globally, we have to make sure everything is adapted for our environment and our culture here in Kurdistan. So that's the first thing. So I think the shelters were created locally with local people, local commitments, local intentions, and the government started these shelters on their own. But donors have, and globally, international actors have played a really important role in supporting the shelters financially, and also with services. So organizations like SEED, we're providing services to women in the shelter and women outside the shelter. And of course, we provide services to men and children as well. But we do serve clients in the shelter, and that support comes from international donors, and we're grateful for that. A lot of our support also comes from local people, local companies, local businesses that believe that violence is wrong, and they want to support us to support women to be free from violence. So I think all actors, local companies. I know that Talabani shelter really doesn't get a huge budget from the government, and local donors, families in helping to solve this problem.
When there is violence against a woman or a girl within a family, children often become the main victims. How should we handle children from such families?
As we talked about, the harm to children of growing up in a violent household is so damaging, and it continues to perpetuate the cycle of violence. I am a proud daughter of a survivor of domestic violence. My mother in the 1960s, before I was born, faced domestic violence in her home. And she encountered many of the same things that women here today encounter, which was she didn't want her daughter, my sister, to be raised in a family. She asked her family for help, and they were extremely reluctant to help my mother. Over time, they accepted her decisions and supported her. So these types of changes take a long time to take place. But I'm proud of my mother for making the decision that she felt was best for my sister. I wouldn't be here, of course, if my mom didn't make that choice, but she didn't want my sister to be raised in a house with violence. And it's a very difficult decision when you don't have family support. So family support is the critical factor here. Shelter protection is important, police protection and enforcement of laws is important, but the number one factor is the family. We have to come together and we have to say, this violence is wrong, and we want to protect not only our daughter, but my grandchildren, my sister, right? I want to protect my sister. I want my sister to feel safe. I want my niece and nephew to be safe, because we don't want to see children impacted for generations and generations because of this violence. So I think it is time for families to come together here and stop blaming the survivor and start supporting her.
I would like to shift the focus to the situation of women in the United States. How are the rights of women and girls in the United States compared to those here?
ما في جن شونه ما في كشان شونه.
Well, I think women's rights are being challenged in the United States. And I think, of course, violence against women is happening there and everywhere in the world. So the issue of violence against women is not a Kurdistan problem. It's a global problem, right? And in the United States, we have shelter systems, and we have NGOs supporting, and we have most of the support to survivors of domestic violence in the United States is from NGOs, and that's true globally as well. But violence continues, so we have to recognize that it's prevalent all around the world, and it's an ongoing challenge. But when we see challenges to equality and women's rights, as we do in the United States today and all across Europe, it's a real threat. And it's frightening. And we have to ensure that we all work together to ensure women's rights are protected. Because when it comes to equality, that is the driver. Inequality is the driver of this violence. So those threats to women's rights in my own country are of grave concern to me.
Let's return to the Kurdistan region. With your 10 years of experience with the SEED Foundation, do you think Kurdish society has developed a better understanding of women's rights? Is it no longer considered shameful for a sister to work in a public place or for a wife to go out with her friends? Do you feel that compared to 10 years ago, there's now a greater understanding of women's rights in the Kurdish society?
Well, my history in Kurdistan starts in 1998. So I started working on Iraq and Kurdistan in 1998. So it's been a longer horizon, maybe 25 years since I was young. But for the last 10 years that SEED has been operating, I think we've seen dramatic impact. We've seen the improvement of laws. For example, we see a new human trafficking law, which is most human trafficking around the world happens to women, and that's true for Kurdistan as well. So we've seen new laws, we've seen stronger institutions, and we see shifts in people, their behavior, women in public places, in government, in the private sector, in university, and faculty. So every country has its own path. And the path of progress is never like this. Even in my own country, even in the United States of America, the path is never like this. There are always ups and downs and bumps in the road. So overall, I think we're moving in the right direction. I think we need to ensure that the leaders in government continue to maintain their strong policy to have equality and to fight against violence. I think that's a number one most important thing. And we need to work with families and communities to see a change in how we support each other. I think Kurdistan has had many decades of instability and war, and that's changed how we operate. People are in survival mode, right? They just want to survive and get through the day and feed their family and have their kids go to a good school and get work and get jobs. And so, what people want is to feed their family and to see progress. So I think we have seen progress. We have a period of stability here, and we have seen progress on women's rights, and we've seen progress on key actors fighting against violence. So I think overall, I'm optimistic for the future.
What advice do you have for girls who still face difficulties in leaving their homes and working alongside their brothers, those who find it difficult to go out and assist their families?
Well, we're all a product of our environment and how we were raised. I was raised by a strong woman. My husband was raised by strong women. And when women aren't given that advantage, when they don't see equality in their home, they might censor themselves, and they might not have confidence to step forward into their roles. So I think it's important that within our culture that women, one of the things that we do is we work with fathers and sons. We work with men to think about a different way to raise their family, that they want to be close to their sons and daughters, and they want to listen to them more, and they want to hear from their children about what their hopes and dreams are. And I think we've seen incredible results with that program. We work with mothers to ensure that they are connected to their daughters and they know how to support their daughters, because adolescence is a really difficult time. I have 2 teenagers, so I know. And so supporting families to listen to each other and find a new way to support each other, I think, is the critical key.
Let me ask you about your family. You are the wife of Talabani, the Vice Prime Minister of Kurdistan region. We have seen Mr. Qubat support efforts to eliminate violence against women and back the NGOs that support this case. My question is, was Mr. Qubat always like this, or was it your influence on him?
Can I say it's a little bit of both?
Both.
It's both, yes.
Okay.
So my husband was raised by his grandmother, who was a very strong and powerful woman, whose husband honored her role, and they had a difficult life in opposition to Saddam Hussein, and he was raised by her and aunties, and his mother was also a very strong woman. So I think that by the time we met, he accepted equal roles for women, but I'm not sure that he really realized how difficult it is for many women, because he was raised in an environment of equality. So I think he expected that was the normal way. And so until we started our work here at SEED, and my husband doesn't just hear from me, he hears from women's organization and women in government all the time about the challenges that they face. Women in the media face special challenges. So he's hearing from many about the challenges that they face, and he believes in equality and puts that into action when he chooses female mayors and female ministers. He chooses them because he thinks they can do a good job, not because they're women, but because he thinks they're the best person for the job. And they've proven themselves. So I think that these are his true beliefs. And my work at SEED has maybe shine a light on some of the challenges that women face and the inequality that they face and the violence that they face. So I think that's helped him see a different side of things.
Have you ever suggested a topic related to violence against women to him so that he can address it within the government?
Well, I look at every conversation as an advocacy opportunity because we all have to make change in every way that we can, at home and at work. And Qubat and I enjoy talking about our work together. And we're both committed to see positive change in Kurdistan and to see everyone here thrive. So we do talk about our issues a lot, and we talk about the changes that we see could happen and should happen, and the problems that the normal person faces here in Kurdistan. And I find him open to hearing about my work, and I'm open to talking about his work, and I'm not afraid to express my opinions, nor is he. And we listen to each other and we respect each other. And I think that makes us successful as a married couple, that we listen and respect each other. And we recognize we each have our own jobs, and we have our own jobs to do, and we respect each other's role. And we make decisions together about how we raise our family. And I think that's what makes it work.
My final question is for you. As the wife of Mr. Qubat and as a member of Mam Jalal's family, could you share your experience of living with Mam Jalal? What were his views and principles regarding women and women's issues?
Well, the funny thing is that I knew Mam Jalal long before I met my husband, because I worked for the U.S. government, and on my first day on the job working on Iraq, I escorted my future father-in-law, Imam Talal, to sign the peace agreement with Kak Massoud, the Washington Agreement, in August of 1998. So I met my father-in-law in a professional capacity, and I have to say that I always felt respected, and I always felt valued, and he always treated the colleagues in the State Department, half of whom were women, with respect. So I think it starts there. And I think that my father-in-law was committed to equality, and he practiced it. Women were in important roles in his party and in his government. He treated his wife with respect, and she had a prominent role in decision-making and in his life. And so I think that that's a very important legacy. And I hope that that legacy is honored and valued in the future decades here in Kurdistan. And I think it's very important that he believes that everybody's opinion mattered. He listened to everybody, and he treated people with respect. And that goes not just for women, but for minorities and different religions and different classes of people. And he treated people as all important and with respect. And I think that's a really important legacy that he leaves.
Sherri Kraham Talabany.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Sherri Kraham Talabany, the president and founder of the SEED Foundation.
My pleasure.
Thank
Thank you for being with us.
Ka biner mamun. Asudab.